Hey guys, today I will be taking a look at some devastating new data for the Trump campaign, as after the first presidential debate, Joe Biden's numbers have surged once again nationwide. He now leads by a margin of 9% over President Trump, which I think is absolutely substantial. This is the largest lead that Joe Biden has seen on the national scale since the month of July when he peaked nationwide. But now, as the election is getting closer and there's less time for President Trump to catch up, Joe Biden's lead has increased even more. He now leads on average, according to Real Clear Politics, by a margin of 9%. And this is absolutely huge for Joe Biden, as typically when the election nears, the race is supposed to get closer. However, this time around, it seems that the exact opposite is occurring. As we're entering the month of October, Joe Biden's numbers have increased by almost 3% since what they were on debate day on the 29th of September, when Joe Biden was only leading by a margin of 6.6%. Since then, he's been able to cross the 50% mark once again. It now leads by a margin of exactly 9%, as you can see, the largest margin Joe Biden has seen since the month of July. And I'm actually going to minimize this thing right here because really the election only really began in the month of March after he won on Super Tuesday and Bernie Sanders dropped out. So after he became the presumptive nominee, basically on around the 17th or 18th of March, I believe. So I'm going to make this a little bit smaller. So as you can see, Joe Biden has been leading very, very consistently. During the early days of this race, it was pretty close, or it was a lot closer than it was right now, with him having his smallest lead in early May when he led by just 4.4% nationwide. But after the Black Lives Matter protests, Joe Biden's numbers have gone up and they have never gone down again. They, of course, peaked at the peak of those riots in June and July. Since then, his numbers did fall quite a bit, with President Trump's approval rating as well as his polling numbers increasing in early August. And then after the RNC, he did have a little bit of a bump there, but really nothing too substantial. And now after the first presidential debate, with the second debate probably going to be canceled in my opinion, with even a smaller chance or a smaller opportunity for Donald Trump to be able to win voters back from 2016, Joe Biden now leads by 9%. And that is huge. We're going to compare this to the numbers from previous elections in just a moment, just to see how monumental this is for Joe Biden. But on 538, I also want to take a look at 538 as well. Joe Biden leads on average by 8.9%. So basically a 0.1% difference. And it's pretty surprising to see that Joe Biden's doing better on Real Clear Politics than he is on 538, as 538 has been typically better for the former vice president than Joe Biden. But as you can see right here in the month of October, Joe Biden's gone all the way up to 8.9%. From on the 29th, he was only up a margin of 7.1%. So still a huge increase for Joe Biden from the first presidential debate. As you can see, there's not a single poll you can find where President Trump is even close. There's not a single poll where you can find. There's a vice presidential poll where Harris is up 1, up 3. So even Harris is doing better than Mike Pence. But there's not a single poll where Joe Biden leads by a small margin. Basically, every poll shows him up at least 7, 8, 9%, even 13%, 16% in some polls that we have seen. So looking down here, as you can see, Joe Biden just sweeping Donald Trump everywhere in every single poll. I can show you guys more polls down here, but really there's no point because Joe Biden is just doing so phenomenal nationwide as of right now. And typically, of course, the elections get much closer, and that's what people have been saying, especially people on the right have spent this whole time saying how the election is going to get much closer as election night actually nears and the month of November approaches. But at this point, I really don't see that happening. I think Joe Biden's lead is probably going to decrease by a little bit, by election night, but definitely I think he's still going to be leading by at least 6, 7, 8%, which I think is definitely enough for him to win the election. If we compare this to 2016, Hillary Clinton led by a margin of 3.2% on election night. She underperformed and she did win the popular vote by a margin of 2.1%. Of course, she was able to win the popular vote despite losing the election in general, losing the electoral college. And taking a look at the polling data here, there's just much more up and downs between Clinton and Trump. And this was when, people thought of Donald Trump's presidency as a joke. So I'm actually going to move this to the month of March as well. People did always expect Clinton to be the nominee, but really not Trump. So I'm actually going to move it to April because I think Trump actually won the nomination a little bit later than Biden did this time around. So I'm going to put it at April 1st. And as you can see here, the numbers were so up and down in 2016. Clinton was doing pretty well, led by 10% in early April, and that would be the largest lead she would ever see. And then after that, Trump overtook him or her for basically a couple of days in late May, which was pretty surprising to see. And then Trump's numbers dropped significantly after some good performances from Clinton. And, at this time, Clinton was still fighting for the Democratic primary nomination against Bernie Sanders, basically all the way up until the month of June when her numbers spiked. And then after the Republican National Convention in 2016, Trump's numbers spiked, of course, to when he led, this is basically his height, 45.7%. That's very similar to the actual percentage of votes that he won on election night. And then, of course, after the DNC, Clinton's numbers went straight up. Of course, she continued to increase, and then she fell right there in mid-September. And then, as you can see here, this was basically when the Access Hollywood tapes were released for President Trump, when even Republicans like Lindsey Graham were calling for President Trump to drop out of the race. This was when people thought he was absolutely finished after the, I'm sure you guys all know what I'm talking about, but after the Access Hollywood tapes came out with Trump on that bus. And as you can see now, he is, his numbers fell all the way down to 41%. That was one of the lowest points of his campaign, and really the point when people thought that he was definitely going to lose the election. And, according to the popular vote, he was never going to win. He was always under Clinton in the polls at the end, and the results did show that. And as you can see, Clinton led by a margin of 3.2%. But the difference here is that Clinton's numbers and Trump's numbers was so much more fluid in 2016. In 2020, take a look at this graph right here. Joe Biden has been leading so consistently over the president. There's never been a single moment in time when Joe Biden's lead was, really small. I mean, he did have smaller leads, around 4% in December, in the months of January when he was at his low point. He led by 4% in May. But basically, since the summer, Joe Biden's lead has been so consistent. There's never been a point in time when Donald Trump has gotten close to reaching Joe Biden's polling numbers. And this is just because Joe Biden is just a much more popular candidate. If you take a look at the favorability right now between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, Joe Biden's favorability is a full plus 3.3. Now, that is a positive, and for a politician, that is very good. That's a very good favorability, and I would definitely be happy with that. Plus 3.3% nationwide. President Trump's is negative 13.2%. This is one of the lowest numbers he's seen this entire time. He had quite a bit of a drop-off since the protests began. It did go up, and that was expected, but Joe Biden is still doing so much better, and in recent days, Joe Biden's numbers have increased all the way to his peak at a full plus 5 nationwide. This is his largest, his best favorability in the entire race. His popularity really did fall after doing horribly in the first races in the Democratic primary. His popularity really did start to fall, but after that, Joe Biden's favorability has seen a huge increase after this. So this is very good for Joe Biden. If you take a look at the 2016 favorability, you see that Hillary Clinton was also a very unpopular candidate. He was only plus 8 over President Trump, while Joe Biden, as you can see, is plus 16.5. So Joe Biden's favorability is 2 times better over Trump than Clinton's was 4 years ago. As you can see, Clinton's numbers, she was not popular. Trump was more unpopular. And yes, Trump is more popular now than he was last time, but still Biden is also much more popular than Clinton. Biden is literally 15 points more popular than Hillary Clinton from 2016. And that is not a good sign for President Trump. Trump did much better over Hillary because Hillary was also a superbly unpopular candidate, and there were so many Republicans that did not support Donald Trump, but saw voting for Hillary Clinton as an even worse option. This time around, there are still those types of voters, but I think that a lot more anti-Trump voters and also voters who saw Hillary Clinton as an even worse option are going to vote for Joe Biden this time around, and that's why I think Joe Biden is on track to winning this election, because he is just, as plain as it is, much more popular than Hillary Clinton, and that really is going to change the election, as more people are going to want to vote for him, because a lot of people did not even come out for Hillary Clinton 4 years ago. A lot of people just just slept the election through. They just did not come out for Secretary Clinton. And then taking a look at the 2012 numbers between Obama and Romney, I just want to show, how Obama, one of the most popular Democratic presidents, is faring right now. He's not one of the most popular Democratic presidents, but he is basically the most popular Democrat in the entire country. In 2012, he led by 0.7% over Romney on election night, or November 5th, basically. But that's when the last polls came out for 2012. And in 2012, even more of an up and down race. I mean, we can make this a little bit smaller, shrink it to, I guess, March 1st as well. And then it's still so up and down. Obama was even behind Mitt Romney for most of the month of October. And we could definitely see, something like this happening where Trump goes up and Biden just absolutely collapses in his poll numbers. But really, that's not too, possible, because if you take a look at the polls in 2012, the candidates were, they were both pretty strong candidates in my opinion. I think we saw two very strong candidates in the 2012 election, but now it's just people are consolidating around Joe Biden, and there really hasn't been too much movement in this race, which really does beg the question, will the race really change up until election night? In my opinion, no. I think the race is going to stay pretty much the same until election night, unless President Trump can pull off some really great October surprise, which, I mean, he should just do now at this point, because votes are now already being cast. And so yeah, like that sort of email investigation opening into Clinton's emails the last week of the election, that really isn't going to work this time, because most votes already would have been cast before that point, or a huge number, around 40-50% at least. So it's really not going to work for Trump this time around, because I do think that if the election was just held 2 weeks earlier, Donald Trump would not have won the election. He would not have won those crucial swing states in the Rust Belt. But 2012, it was so close, and Obama did overperform the polls by quite a bit, plus 3.9 in the end. Joe Biden plus a full 9%. The lowest point for Joe Biden this election cycle, after, I guess, the numbers that he saw during the Democratic primary after he became the presumptive nominee, his low point was plus 4.4. Taking a look at the 2012 numbers, Obama's high point, as you can see, his high point was literally plus 4.7. Excluding, all of this. But this was, still when Romney was still battling for the nomination. But really, Obama's high point, it was really just that plus 4.7% in August, when Obama was doing pretty well in the polls. But so Joe Biden's worst polling data this entire election is basically similar to that of Obama's best. And that is very good for Joe Biden, as, he is just consolidating his lead even more and more as his election approaches. If we take a look at the polls, state of Florida, Joe Biden's numbers are increasing here. They were only up for Joe Biden by a margin of 1.8%. Now it's 3.4% for Joe Biden. So almost a 2 times increase for the former vice president in the state of Florida since that debate. Just taking a look at many swing states. Let's take a look at Georgia. Biden plus 0.9%. He has been leading every single poll out of the state of Georgia. So this is a state that has not gone to a Democrat since 1992. Georgia is now expected to go to Joe Biden according to the polls. Iowa, Joe Biden also doing pretty well, only down 1.1%. State that Trump won by a full 9% 4 years ago. And if you want to take a look at some other states, North Carolina, Joe Biden plus 2.2%, also an increase from the 29th when he was only up 1%. Now it's up 2.2% for Joe Biden. So all this does mean is that Joe Biden is probably going to be able to reach 270 electoral votes. He's doing very well in basically every single swing state, much better than, both Obama or Clinton, because he could really, if he were to overperform, I think, by 1% in some swing states, he could really outperform Obama's margins from 2012, or not 2012 and 2008. I really don't think he's going to outperform Obama from 2008. But it is still possible for Joe Biden at this point. I really do think that there's a possibility that Joe Biden is going to do better than Obama did in his best election year, because that is just how well Joe Biden is doing right now. He is not the best candidate. I do think that Obama was a much better candidate than Joe Biden is right now. But, compared to President Trump, I think that Joe Biden definitely has a much larger advantage than the advantage that Obama had in 2008. And looking at these states here, Joe Biden is leading in Minnesota by a likely margin. He's leading in Nevada by a likely margin. Wisconsin by a lean margin. Michigan by a lean margin as well. These are all states that went to Trump. Wisconsin, Michigan went to Trump. Pennsylvania also went to Trump, lean margin for Biden as well. 2nd district also went to Trump, and Joe Biden's already over 270 electoral votes. 2nd district of Nebraska as well, a lean margin as well as of right now. According to my prediction yesterday, Arizona also lean state, joining Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, his other 3 flips on this map. North Carolina polling in favor of Joe Biden this whole election cycle. Georgia as well now. State of Florida is also a lean state once again. The state of Ohio is a tilt state for Joe Biden. And then for President Trump, we have the state of Iowa, I guess, and then state of Texas, which I think is a tilt state once again in this election. So things not looking good for President Trump. Basically, Joe Biden has surged once again, and quite a big surge this time it has been. So probably one of his largest surges he has seen this entire election cycle, other than the month of June after the protests began, and that's when he really shot up to his peak. And so yeah, we'll continue to see how these polls change, and if Joe Biden will be able to reach that 10% mark once again in this election cycle as the election is quickly approaching. So if you enjoyed this video, please consider leaving a like down below. Leave your thoughts in the comments below as well. Subscribe if you have not, and as well as that, leave your suggestions for videos you'd like to see from me in the future, and I will see all of you guys in the next video.